100 days have passed since October 7th, and in that time, Israel's war on Gaza has killed 24,000 people, injured more than 60,000, and displaced nearly 2 million more. Nonetheless, in the Biden administration statement marking 100 days of conflict, the words Palestine or Palestinians were not mentioned even once, an oversight that was not missed by journalists, Arab Americans, and other parties who are concerned about the humanitarian conditions in Gaza and who are pushing for a ceasefire. Speaking of those humanitarian concerns, last week, lawyers for South Africa and Israel presented their cases before The Hague, where a court will judge whether or not Israel is indeed guilty of genocide in Gaza. We covered South Africa's case in depth on Thursday here at Rising when it happened, and the Friday team covered Israel's defense on Friday. But although Israel's case was widely covered by the establishment media, most major networks, including the BBC, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox, failed to stream and barely covered South Africa's presentation of its case to the ICJ. Meanwhile, dozens of trucks carrying food aid remain stuck in Israeli custody as the World Food Program, UNICEF, and the World Health Organization said yesterday that Gazans are in dire need of food and aid and at risk of widespread starvation and disease. The WFP said new entry routes need to be open to Gaza, more trucks need to be allowed in each day, and aid workers and those seeking aid need to be allowed to move around safely. Director Cindy McCain told PBS people in Gaza risk dying of hunger just miles from trucks filled with food, said WFP Executive Director, that was Cindy McCain. Every hour lost puts countless lives at risk.
Meanwhile, President Biden is apparently growing frustrated with Benjamin Netanyahu and, quote, running out of patience with Bibi as Israel continues to, quote, give Biden the finger at every juncture. According to reporting in Axios, two leaders haven't spoken since Biden abruptly hung up on Netanyahu after he denied the U.S.'s request to release Palestinian tax holdings. In the first months of the war, the two spoke every other day. Now, one U.S. official told Axios the situation sucks and we are stuck. On the outside, however, the Biden administration is putting up a united front. Here's John Kirby last week.
You mentioned a couple days ago that President Biden has spoken with Prime Minister Netanyahu over the holidays. By our count, that he last spoke with him on December 23rd. If that's correct, that would make it 18 days since he spoke with the Prime Minister, and that would be the longest time that they've gone without speaking since the beginning of the war. I understand Secretary Blinken is in the region and has been, but if they haven't spoken for 18 days, what does that say about their relationship now as compared to several weeks ago?
The fact that they haven't spoken in any period of days, your count's 18, I'm not going to question your math, doesn't say anything about the relationship between the Prime Minister and the President or between the United States and Israel. These are two men that know each other, have known each other a long time, and they'll talk again, I have no doubt about it.
Meanwhile, new reporting in a major Israeli newspaper finds that the IDF issued a so-called Hannibal directive on the night of October 7th, ordering troops to stop Hamas from returning to Gaza at all costs, including by killing hostages mistaken for or disguised as Hamas. So this has been something that has been talked about and kind of rumored and speculated about for some time. Now we have some reporting behind it. There have been a number of reported stories of hostages or fleeing Israelis on October 7th being killed. The Hannibal directive says that it's basically better not to give Hamas the strategic bargaining opportunity of being able to leverage hostages, and it's better off to kill them. And I think that this gained some traction after, of course, we all saw the 3 Israeli hostages who were waving a white flag, who had stripped down their clothes to try to make themselves seem as innocent and not concealing weapons and all of everything they could possibly do to make themselves look unthreatening, still get killed by the IDF. And it is interesting and heartbreaking to see some confirmation here that this really is apparently a strategy that's been adopted by the IDF.
Sure. I personally cannot tell to what extent this actually has been verified, because this was in a Ynet, which is in Hebrew, can't read it. There's speculation about this. I see reporting in an opinion piece in Haaretz that says if Israel used this controversial procedure, we need to talk about it now. So certainly we will look for further confirmation of that. So you mentioned earlier in that read you did that the proceedings of the ICJ were only selectively played for American news watchers.
It was really incredible. I mean, so the way it was set up was that all Thursday was the South African case, all Friday was the Israeli case. These aired in the morning in The Hague. So by the time we all woke up, all the news that was available was already out, right? You would expect the news, local news sources, American news sources, to be able to give you a really easy, quick summary of the kinds of cases that were made, to live stream aspects of it if they wanted to, et cetera. Well, Thursday, we didn't see almost any coverage. I think you saw a couple of articles mentioned in various online and other places and print, but none of the live streaming that you might expect of a Senate hearing or these similar kinds of events that happen domestically. And you might say, that's fine. This is just international news that they don't want to air for ratings reasons. Well, that argument goes out the window when Friday rolls around and it's time for Israel to make its case. And all of these networks that saw fit to ignore South Africa's case that Israel is in fact enacting a genocide suddenly find their live streaming capabilities, turn the cameras on, and want to only cover that one-sided aspect of things.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So if these judges were to rule and have that finding, I was reminded the other day that they did actually rule against Russia in the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a rule that Russia's actions were plausibly genocidal enough and order Russia to stop its invasion. Of course, that has to be enforced by the UN Security Council, and Russia sits on the UN Security Council and can veto such action, and in fact did. It was toothless, which is a long way of saying that I think regardless of the finding, it's going to be it's not going to be enforced. It's going to be
Well, another example, I think I brought this up on my radar on the subject last week. Israel, the ICJ also found that some walls and partitions that Israel had been building on the West Bank were in violation of international law, and Israel ignored that as well. And that wasn't a veto issue. They just ignored complying with what the ICJ had recommended. So it certainly is a question as to whether or not this will have any broader real-world consequences. I think what's important here is not the idea that the ICJ has some enforcement mechanism to stop Israel from committing a genocide. The question is, if they make a finding like this, on top of the majority of Americans wanting a ceasefire and being horrified by some of the images that are coming out of Gaza, on top of Joe Biden losing so much electoral support, looking very much like he's going to lose Michigan, in large part because of Arab American disgust with the way he's been conducting foreign policy there. If on top of all of that, U.S. denials that anything bad is going on are being undercut by a finding of a really established and influential court like the ICJ and the condemnation of the broader international community, can Biden keep holding on in its defense of Israel?
I would love to hear more from Donald Trump now that he is even more likely, overwhelmingly, to be the Republican nominee coming out of a big win at Iowa last night. This goes totally against the media strategy, the mainstream media, which is to prevent us from hearing what Donald Trump has to say about anything for risk that it's misinformation or it's dangerous. But I would love to know where Trump is with respect to the Israel issue. Obviously, he's bragged about being the most pro-Israel president ever, moving the embassy, but in other ways has wanted to cut deals with people and have a less interventionist foreign policy. Would he share Biden's frustration with Netanyahu? Does the America First aspect kick in? I have no idea. I would really like to hear from him in detail on what he would do differently from Biden. I think some votes could be up for grabs depending on what he has to say.
I think so too. Well, we have more to say about this subject. Stick around. We have an upcoming interview with one of our favorite guests, Dr. Trita Parsi. More Rising for you right after this.